Hey there, welcome to the Friendly Ties podcast. Today, we're talking about not a board game, which is a little unusual. We have a good friend named Nick, who's waiting in the wings, who's been
We've
to
never
this...
met before.
Yes.
Who's never talked here before.
Who just went to this board game convention called the World Board Gaming Championships. I think I got that right. And while Nick was there for like 9 days, I had no idea it was that long, he was like giving us this ongoing story about how it was going. And I think Anastasia and I just got super curious about it. I've been to around 10 different board game conventions, professionally and whatnot for my channel. And I know nothing about the WBC. And the more Nick talked, the more I realized how little I knew. And then Anastasia had the great idea to just turn the microphones on and let's talk about it, because we'd love to pick Nick's brain and we think that other people would be curious just like we are. So my question, Nick, is why WBC?
Like, why do I attend?
Yeah,
this
why?
convention?
Yeah, why? Why?
History. I mean, I've attended this convention since I was 12 years old. The first time I went, I think, was in 1999.
Holy cow.
And I go to this convention, or went to this convention with my family almost every single year, actually literally every single year through high school, and then continue to go like college, adulthood. I have never not attended a convention that occurred for it. Of course, it was canceled for a few years because of COVID.
Right.
I have, only gone for a couple days when stuff came up. But for the most part, I've attended this convention for 22 years or something insane like that.
I can't decide what I find more crazy right now, that you've gone to this convention every year for 22 years, or that I'd never heard of it until a year ago. I think one of our other friends just kind of casually dropped in like, oh, well, Nick's world champion of automobiles or something. And I was like, what?
Yeah. So I guess a little like history about the convention. So it's not a huge convention. It's been between like 1,000 and 2,000 people for a pretty long time. And it used to be called Avalon Con back in the days when Avalon Hill was not owned by Hasbro.
Oh, okay.
And when Hasbro bought it, it got essentially like renamed. Like the con got like picked up and was like renamed. And I'm too young to actually like do a proper historical like representation of what the political or business based like landscape of it was. But essentially they picked it up and continue to having the same convention. Instead of being called Avalon Con, they changed the name to the World Board Gaming Championships. We do technically have an international presence. The name World Board Gaming Championships is maybe a little bit
it kind of reminds me of
bold.
baseball, right? The World Series.
Yeah.
It's very
a little
that.
bold. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely more of an East Coast type of convention, and I don't mean like it's got the East Coast attitude. I just mean that it started off in Maryland and then moved to Pennsylvania, and it's actually in the time that I've attended has been at 3 different venues.
Oh, okay.
It's really interesting to me, right? Because I've heard of tournaments for things like I've heard of like Magic tournaments or chess tournaments or poker tournaments, but I didn't realize that. I guess I'd never really considered it, that anyone was playing board games truly like a tournament for board games. And maybe that's naive because it like happens more often than I think, but I'd never, like I said, I'd never really heard of this concept.
Totally. WBC, I think, and part of the reason I keep coming back is that it is the most unique gaming convention I've ever been to and continue to attend. And I've been to a bunch of them of different types. But the thing that's really cool about WBC is that it is very much couched in this tournament structure, which I think sounds very intimidating to people, but I'll explain why it's not intimidating in a minute. But the idea is that there are somewhere between 100 and 150 games. Nowadays, it's 9 days of gaming. It used to be 5.5 days of gaming. And there's a schedule, and the schedule says, hey, you're going to, go play Splendor, or you're going to go play Advanced Squad Leader, or you're going to go play Automobile, you mentioned earlier, right? Like at these specific times is like when we're hosting those things. And then you and, 30 strangers or your best friends are going to show up and play that game. And the people who win that game might then have the opportunity to attend the semifinals, which is scheduled for another time in the future. Or if it's a single elimination tournament, like they'll play against someone else and so on and so forth. And so a lot of these are structured in these kind of like heat, semifinal, final format. And you generally have multiple opportunities to kind of like qualify to go to the next round. The reason that I want to say that it's not as intimidating as like everyone's really intense is that like there's nothing serious on the line. Like at the end of the day, what you win is like a plaque and some bragging rights, right? Like you don't get any real prizes for this. It's just for fun.
I do think it's kind of cool that they give you a literal wood plaque. Like I knew so little about this convention. I'm genuinely not sure if I'd heard about it before I met you, Nick, because we've been friends for like 4 years, and I might have never heard of this before then. So you're possibly the reason. But every time it came into my brain for some reason, I instantly was like, I don't want to go to a championship convention. Like, I want to play just like a ton of different games. I don't want to feel the pressure to like be in. Yes, I was one of those people who were intimidated and probably thought it was going to be more serious. And then you sent photos of the literal wooden plaques that you won. And I was like, I mean, it's towing the line of serious to a certain extent, but I guess it's, it's a little tongue in cheek.
Yeah. I mean, some people, don't get me wrong, some people take it seriously, but I mean, I take it seriously.
I was like, what are you talking about, John? I want to take it seriously. I'm like a little like Nick. I like to think I'm in the school of Nick. And I'm training and I'm ready. I just want you all to know. Next year,
you
I'm
would
ready.
do well here. You would definitely do well here.
No, but I would approach this. I would be so serious about this. I'd be like, what are the games? And then I'd like pick them, and then we would practice. Like it would be
totally.
I would be in it I'd be in it. I'm not gonna win it. Let's be clear. But I'd be in it to succeed, and what succeeding is a relative structure for me. But I'd be in it to succeed.
Yeah. So I now have to tell this like side story. You all know the game A Few Acres of Snow, yeah, and like it's sort of like infamous. There's a broken strategy to it thing.
Yeah, something hammer, the Halifax hammer. Yeah, I've never played the game, but I know the name of the broken strategy. So there you go.
So for a few years, this game was at WBC. Like the first year it was there, like people hadn't even discovered the strategy yet, and then by the second year, like people had. But the GM had come up with sort of this like his like own house rule that's not used in the like Few Acres of Snow community about like how this would get balanced. And my buddy Kevin and I, we for probably 6 weeks beforehand played every other night. Like we just get together, have like a few beers, play this game, and just like practice, and we cleaned up at this tournament.
I like to think so. Jeez, you're not making me not feel intimidated right now.
that's generally an exception to the rule. There's a couple games. It's actually usually more the war games where it's like when you meet XYZ player, you're playing for fun. Like you have like very limited chance. But most games are not as, I think, deterministic as that, and so it's anyone's game. I would say the most competitive game at WBC is Agricola. The people that play that game are so good. I consider myself to be like a decent player. I get squashed anytime I play that game. I cannot advance to the semifinals. It's impossible. They're so good. And for the past 8 years, I don't think a single person has won the game multiple times. Like you'll see a lot of the same people like advancing to the finals, but it's always up in the air. So I think that's like one of the things that's really exciting about it is there are some games where you have like the titans of that game that like keep winning over and over again, but there are also games where you see different people on that placard every single year.
And I guess from I know I keep harping on the intimidation factor, but that is something that affects me with these is like, let's say I go to WBC and I play Agricola, which I've effectively never really played. I could totally just play in that first round and get stomped and be like, cool, I played Agricola, and I could go do something else, right?
Yeah, a couple people I know refer to it as scheduled open gaming, and I actually really like that framing, and that's, I think, one of the things that's most appealing about WBC is like you can go there and you know exactly what you're going to get. You know when it's like when folks are going to be around to play that. Like there's open gaming, you can go do open gaming if you want to, but like mostly it is about like showing up to these events. And like if I want to play Sagrada at 4 p.m. on Thursday, there's going to be 90 other people playing Sagrada at 4 p.m. on Thursday. It's going to happen. I don't need to like, you know, be going to game night and being like, I kind of want to play this tonight. I need to see if people know the rules. Like you have none of that. Like you go and you're there to play.
But that is interesting. So like, so two things that came off of that. The first is like, you do need to know the rules, right? There's no teaching of the rules. There's no like when you show up, like you need to be prepared to play that game.
Great question. So there are A, B, and C class events, and I always get the order wrong, but I think the A class events have no demo. You show up, you need to know what you're doing. The C class event is show up, we'll help you along the way. Don't worry about it at all. And then almost all events are B class, where they have a demo and they basically say, hey, to show up to this, you must at least attend the demo or know how to play. Simple as that. People are generally actually pretty accommodating, and it's actually a good convention to learn games that you're interested in.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, so that's good to know, because like sometimes that can be fairly intimidating. Actually, that's what would intimidate me. Speaking of being intimidated, that's the thing that would intimidate me, is just making sure I was super familiar with whatever the games were. But in addition to that, and this came out of your kind of, you know, live blogging it or whatever, you know, sharing on Discord about your experiences, is there are a lot of games that like I wouldn't expect to be world championship games, like Sagrada or Splendor, or I don't know, I'm trying to think of another one, but like Agricola makes sense to me. Great Western Trail makes sense to me. And I'm not trying to like be disparaging about those games. I guess I felt like there was a lot of like lighter games that you played. One that was like, you told me it was like tic-tac-toe or something. What was it that your world championship of this freaking game?
Delve Reflected, and it's complicated rocks, paper, scissors. By the way, I'm very excited. I've been playing this game for basically since I attended this con, and I've never won it before. So the fact that I won this year is extremely exciting to me.
I'm excited for you, and now we need to play it because I've never heard of it. But nevertheless, it feels very light to be a championship game. Or am I being judgy?
So, I mean, you are being judgy. The point of it is not for these games to be, it's not about like, again, it's really not about like being the best. It's not about the tightest games. It is about people going and getting to play the stuff that they love. And like you've mentioned, a lot of the stuff that's really on the Euro side. And like actually one of the bigger kind of interesting dynamics at the convention is that, you know, Avalon Hill is a war game company, and like Avalon Con was a wargaming convention. And sort of there's been this like shift over time where there are fewer war games and more Euro games, because Euro games are kind of bigger than war games are these days. But a lot of those war games still stick around. Like there's a very, very serious contingent of this convention that comes to play like the 4 games that they love. That is all they come here to do. I'm here to play Panzer Blitz for like 16 hours today. See you guys later. And then there's, you know, folks that are there to like play Sagrada and Splendor and like just kind of like jam as many of the like short games as possible and have a have a good time doing that. And then of course there's the crazy people like me who are just dancing between different events to try to play as many things as possible and fit everything into the schedule.
One thing that jumps out to me a bit, just hearing you talk about it, seeing you your experiences and everything, is that this seems like the only board game convention, or at least the minor subset of board game conventions that are like Cult of the Old focused.
Yeah.
You know, like I've been to a whole bunch of board game conventions. The one I've been to the most is Board Game Geek Con, which I've been to I think 7 times or so. And the reason I love that one so much is because it's just Cult of the New like crazy. Like all the brand new stuff is there, and it's all easily playable, and you can play 24 hours for 5 days straight. By the way, I thought playing for 5 days straight at BGG Con was crazy, and then I heard that WBC is 9 days. but I just think this is interesting because like I see a lot of parallels between WBC and BGGCon based off of what you've been saying, like just a whole bunch of people, but not too many people, you know, a couple thousand or whatever, just playing games like crazy. It's not like game purchasing oriented. It seems like there's, there are vendors at Board Game Geek Con. I don't know if there are at WBC, but that doesn't seem to be the focus of it. But then there is this kind of like inverse correlation where like, new stuff versus old stuff. There's a bunch of old stuff at BGG Con as well. I think it's just me who's gravitated towards the shinies there, but I just think it's kind of interesting. Like one of the reasons that I'm kind of captivated by what you've said about WBC is all these games that I've kind of always wanted to play but never got around to. I mean, like Thurn and Taxis is one. Like never played it. Like never had an opportunity to. I don't think it would light my world on fire, but there's a tournament for it. If I went
There's
there,
a huge scene for Turn and Taxis.
Yeah, exactly.
At WBC, that's a beloved game there. Yeah, it is very much a cult of the old. Part of that is they have this structure, and it's a little bit esoteric, so I'm not going to get into the details, but it's called the Century. And the idea is essentially every year, based on the number of seat hours that are assigned to a game, is going to say that game is going to stick around. And it's got a pretty conservative structure in terms of like how many new games are going to come in and what the sort of like threshold that they need to meet of popularity for them to stick around for the following year. So for example, this year, like Wingspan was the first time ever, and like 1 billion people went to play that game. And so of course it's going to be around for a tournament next year. Like it will make the Century for sure, but events like start off as trial events, and they get rectangular plaques instead of the shield size plaques to like distinguish them. And then if enough people play them, they become a game the following year that's like in the official, seating thing. And then the number of plaques that are associated with each game is based on both their popularity and the number of hours that they're played. So a game like Can't Stop, we have this like evening culture, right? A game that takes it's like totally luck, takes 20 minutes to play. One fires off at like 11 o'clock every single night of the convention, basically. Can't Stop has like everyone at the convention playing it because it's super easy. There's a fun culture around it. And so there's a ton of plaques associated with that game. Whereas something like A Devil Afflicted, which you mentioned earlier, Anastasia, doesn't have quite as many because it's a kind of shorter game with a modest amount of people that play that game.
I mean, you mentioned Beyond the Sun was one of them as well, right?
That was a trial game this year.
Okay, so that makes sense, yeah.
And you also mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you've mentioned this before, automobiles, one of your favorite games ever, and you are a world champion in it. Not this year though, right?
This year I got second place, yeah.
Way to rub salt in the wounds, Anastasia.
I was just trying to be accurate for the log. We can have Nick
for the log.
We'll have to have Nick give us a rundown of these things. But you mentioned, and I don't know if this is inferring too much, but that maybe the game might, like a game like that wasn't as popular this year, might not make it in the future. I don't know how much longevity has to do with keeping games around.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if a game like Automobile is totally one of the things I love to play at this convention because I don't really get to play it anywhere else. And yeah, unfortunately, I think this year might have been the death knell for it because it's been a smaller tournament for a while and there were just even fewer people than normal. So it's probably on the chopping block, but you never really know until you get to the end of the convention. And attendance is all wonky because we're still living in a pandemic-y world. So
yeah.
I'll have to see. Hopefully it sticks around. But yeah, stuff drops out, right? And like RIP all the games that I've played and loved that have dropped out, but they also make room for all the new things. Like if we didn't do that, the convention would just get bloated and bloated and bloated. And then eventually there's just too many games and every tournament has like 7 people playing them. But instead what they do is they keep it pretty tight and things come in and go out. And what that does is it keeps a modest to strong size showing for every game, and that's part of the fun.
Almost like Cult of the Medium, then.
It is though. That's actually what John. You're onto something there. The Cult of the Old, if you will, or the Cult of the Medium. That is what makes me want to go. Like I love Cult of the New as much as the next one. And, frankly, you can't be friends with John and not.
The pile of games that Anastasia just bought and had shipped to my house to deliver agrees with you.
Okay, let's be clear. If you look at that pile, you can see how many of them were old, came out over 5 years ago versus
Very
John's
true.
games out of the same order that we ordered from overseas. His were all brand new.
Yes.
And I want to play all of them equally. But
Yes.
that's not the point. The point is that I love playing new things. But this is actually something I realized in the last year, and it actually kind of is a byproduct of what we're talking about right now, which is that I found myself, particularly during the pandemic, we were playing a lot of games on Tabletop Simulator, and we could play them kind of over and over, and there was a lot of opportunities, and sometimes you were just like, I don't want to learn something new, and so we would like play these kind of same games over again, and we'd get pretty good at them. I mean, it wasn't about getting good at them, but it was about like learning the strategies. I mean, Nick, you brought up Agricola, and a friend of yours from that you met at WBC, who's a huge Uwe Rosenberg fan, extremely good. He became like my like Hallertau, like, trainer. Like I didn't even like we'd like report game sessions, and he'd like make comments, and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do it Shadow's way. I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna do better. Like, and we must have played Hallertau like, I'm not like kidding, like 45 times. Like I don't know how many times I played that game, but I like loved that. I loved getting better at that game, and I enjoyed seeing the things that came out of it. Now, I don't know if I'd feel that way about Splendor, for example. No knocks on Splendor, but like I think certain games lend themselves to that level of play for me. But I also love Can't Stop, and I would be so happy
Can't
to
Stop
play
is so much
Can't
fun.
Stop.
I would I
Like,
would not feel intimidated. I'm not saying I would do very well, but I would jump right into that.
I'm
listening
sure you do
to you
just
talk
fine.
about this, it feels like, so like Hallertau, new game, right? Or that was a 2021, or yeah, I think it was a 2021 release or
2020.
2020 release. 2020.
I guess it
New
depends.
game.
In Germany, whatever.
Yeah. But like, so I see the joy in that. But then I also like, I hear you talk about all of these older games, and I'm like, gosh, like I haven't played A Few Acres of Snow in forever, and I haven't played, like, honestly, listening to you talk, it sounds like just like it sounds like a night on Yukata, like, but like in person. Like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Yukata, but like these are all these games that Nick has mentioned, like a ton of them, particularly the older ones, are games I only ever discovered by playing on Yukata, and like, I just I don't know, it sounds fabulous, Nick.
And I mean, since you mentioned Yukata, like there are games that I learned because they were at this convention. I was like, I'm gonna try that game next year. So like Agizia, which is a game that I actually really adore now and has played at this convention. I'd never heard of it before, and someone was like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. Like I was chatting to them about it at this convention. I went and like learned it on Yukata so that I could play it at this convention. I mean, I could have just gone to a demo, but I am me, and I would like to be a little bit more prepared.
I'm going to win this demo.
Well, that kind of speaks to something that I was also thinking, is like the ability to play games online. Now, I talked about jamming Hallertau and Tabletop Simulator, but I have played a lot on Yukata for years and years and years. I don't play a lot on Board Game Arena, but obviously Board Game Arena has grown tremendously. You play lots of games on there. Some of these games to improve, I know we've talked about, like, Beyond the Sun is an example of a game like I'm scared to play now against you, Nick, because you've played it on there a lot, and but what I'm trying to say is, like,
I'm literally the same skill level as before. You could definitely beat me at that game.
happily love to,
for sure.
But what I wanted to bring up is like this idea is like feels like there's like more opportunities now to play games over and over, and I'm not saying you have to do that to be good at that, but to see the strategy in it, I wonder how that maybe lends itself to a convention like this, where like you start playing games from sort of a strategy perspective and start thinking about, oh, this is like Vikings for me. That's the game. Like you guys want to talk like me. I get to talk strategy on Vikings for a whole podcast. Like I have played that game so many times, and I could like analyze every moment. And lots of people don't play Vikings like that, but I do.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like there's a number of tournaments, a number of specific games that, lend themselves more to it, where the meta is very developed around the game. People definitely know what they're doing. Like a game that I won't play is Puerto Rico, because I'm a rookie at that game and I don't much care for it. But I wouldn't wander into a heat, because people that play the game at this convention have been doing so for 15, 20 years, and they like know what they're doing. They know the flow of that game. And if you want to get good, that's a good place to do it. Like you'll sit down and really learn what to do. Great Western Trail, which you all know is like one of my favorite games. I learned it and I went to play it at WBC and I got smoked. And I was like, this can't
No
happen.
way.
I'm going to get better at this game. And then the next year I came
Cue the
back and I
montage.
like got into the semifinals and I lost in the semifinal by like 2 points. And then the pandemic hit. And so this year I was like, I'm getting to the finals of Great Western Trail. And I did, right? Like there's a whole like arc there. And that's really fun. That's really cool. I love that.
I have one question about, I don't know, the game playing atmosphere. I know I keep harping on, being intimidated and whatnot. I take a while to play games. Like I'm just not a very fast player, and in tournament
I'm
setting,
super fast, by the way. I'm the fastest player you've ever met. John and I together, by the way, we play at lightning speed. Lightning.
Yeah. It sure is a good thing that when we record our games, I can cut out the like minutes that we spend thinking about our turns. But yeah, just like when I
Without
think
Nick
of
to push us along, we never go.
Exactly. When I think of my previous experiences playing board games at conventions, like Board Game Geek Con or Essen or other places, like it's usually like we play one game, we move on to the next thing, and it's like all about just like exploration and trying the thing. There's usually huge asterisks as like a rule gets missed because it's loud and chaotic. But like when I think of WBC and you're like potentially playing the game over and over again, everybody knows the rules, so like I assume it's much more accurate, but I'm also worried that like people are just going to look at me as I'm taking too long to think through my turns because they've got a game to get to, or like I'm going to be playing this one again, and I don't know, like that's another wave of my own type of anxiety that occurs to me.
I'll say that I don't think it comes up, right? Like games get adjudicated, they're in time slots, and most of the time slots are pretty generous for most of the games. And so it doesn't generally come up too often. The two of you, I know that you like we're joking about you playing slowly, but like I think that you would play at a pace that's like completely reasonable and expected for folks at the convention, right? So no one is expecting like speedy fast play. But, it can get to a place where like a game ends up getting adjudicated because multiple people are playing a little bit slowly, or often happens more with folks that have like never played the game before and it shows up. This year I had a game that really nearly, the only event I had this year was actually in a game of Sagrada. It's an hour slot, which is plenty for Sagrada, but we ended up starting 15 minutes late, and then there were just like a couple thinking points at the end of the game. And like a bunch of us had places, like I had a place that I needed to be and like made it very clear at the beginning. And what ended up happening in that game is I took my last turn at like, 4:59 or whatever it was. I needed to be somewhere at 5. And I was like, I gotta go. I hope you guys can score. And the reason that I could do that was because the person who owned the game was like, you know what? I don't have a thing at 5. I will just pick up. I'll score the game. And that wonderful human being then like came and found me. It was like, oh, by the way, you won. Like, it's not like as in that was the closest like timing thing, and like how pleasant to like know that I could walk away from a table and like get everything counted up and have this person go out of their way to like tell me that it ended up like, that's like lovely, right? So yeah, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. Like it does. And very occasionally games get like put into time slots that are not appropriate. So like a classic example of that is Castles of Burgundy used to be in a 2-hour time slot, and plenty of people can play that game in 2 hours. But enough people couldn't play that game in 2 hours that they ended up changing it to a 3-hour time slot, which is like egregiously too long for most people playing that game. But they needed to accommodate for folks that just needed a little bit of extra time. So it does come up, but I don't think it's as common as you might think that it is.
That makes sense. One thing that kind of occurred to me when I was seeing your ongoing commentary, it kind of reminded me of like when I was figuring out my classes for college, like, slotting in this, like, oh, I want to take this class, but it conflicts with that class. Which one do I want to take more? That's not something I'd ever thought about from a board game convention type thing, but you were like weighing like one semifinal versus one other thing. And I just thought that was kind of humorous.
100%. And I like what I call the scheduling mini game. That's one of the things that I would say is one of my strengths at this convention. And I really enjoy doing that. When I go to something like Gen Con, there's just like a million options. You can't make those kinds of decisions. You're like kind of arbitrarily, you're like, this looks best, I'm going to go to this. This looks best, I'm going to go to this. Because they have just 300 things scheduled going on every single hour. At WBC, it's like there are somewhere between 2 and 10 events firing off this hour. And so I'm just picking between like a very palatable grocery store decision amount of things here, and I can do that.
That makes me think, though, like, speaking of your, like, the play experience that you're having, right? Like, so the scheduling of it all, the slow play. But one of the things I thought of while you were talking, I was like, you know, when we play a game, speaking of John and I playing like a game where it's just like him and me and whatever it is, we will like sit there and like analyze with each other. We'll like talk through best moves. We'll be like,
make suggestions.
Maybe you should do this. Make suggestions. Like, you know, like, oh, you could beat me if you do X. Like, and depending on the game, you know, obviously some things you don't say because you're like trying to get into each other's heads, but we do a lot of table talk, and the same thing with the three of us. I mean, like, you know, we all, when we play a game, we do the same thing. I mean, and I can't tell you guys, I mean, how many games have I played where I've been like, Nick, what's the best move here?
Yeah.
Like, you know,
how do I beat
you? Particularly when I am actively trying to improve. Like every game that I play, if it's a game we're playing again, or it's a game I know Nick's particularly good at, Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, those are great examples of games where I'm always trying to get a little bit better. And I know that Nick is very good at them. And so I will ask him for to basically rate choices or different ideas, you know, or run things by you. And I'm curious how that works. I mean, you're not going to do that in a tournament, right? Like that. Like, what's the table talk like?
Yeah, I didn't mention this in the timing thing that John brought up, but like part of the reason the games don't tend to go long is because most people are here to play the game. So we don't tend to have like the side conversations, the jokes, the like, you know, pulling apart like this and that strategy component. You might, if it's a specific table, maybe it's people that you know, or maybe someone who's just that kind of person. I've definitely sat down with people this year who are there for the social experience, who are like, you know, chatting you up and like asking you about where you're from and, you know, all those kinds of things. They definitely happen. I've definitely had games where at the end of it, you know, there's someone else across the table and you're like, what did you think about this play that I made here? And they're like, well, you know, I think it was a mistake because of this and that, right? Like you will have that experience, but I will say more commonly people are there to play the game and then move on with their lives. So that deconstruction component, you know, I think there's a lot of trust that's required in something like that. So you kind of got to get a vibe that you trust the person across the table from that. Like I don't do that at a public board game night, right? Like that's really rare that I would do that there. I do that with my friends because I trust them and because I know that I'm not going to come across as an arrogant ass when I like make suggestions about how to play and things like that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's been so long since I played any games not with you guys, you know, or like in a. I mean, like because of the pandemic, you know, it's been a long time since I've just been at like an open gaming situation and just been like alone with my thoughts and the game. I got to tell you, Nick, like ever since we met and we started playing games, and I sort of discovered this idea of getting better at games, learning the strategy of games, trying to beat Nick at games. Like it has sort of changed. It's changed the way I play games. Like, and I think it is a mindset. Like, I think, you know, John, you were kind of touching on this, that like, you just love to like explore them and see what happens. I think I really do like getting better at them. And I've learned that I do not need to win. I like winning. But I like improving. I like figuring a game out. I like mastering it. And there are plenty of games not worth my time in doing that. But I do like taking games apart in that way. And so I'm realizing as you talk about WBC that a lot of the way that you game, which is now kind of rubbed off on me, is because of this convention. I'm like, even as you're talking, I'm like thinking, oh, Great Western Trail, right? This is where he played that. This is where he got good at this. This is where suddenly you and I are having Maracaibo strategy episodes because, like, of this podcast, because you were practicing games in this specific way. Or am I attributing too much?
I mean, That's totally correct. I will say that Great Western Trail is a bad example because I've played probably like 150 times online. So I've definitely got a lot better from that rather than from playing at the convention. But that was the fire that lit for me, right?
That's what I mean. The fire that lit, the mentality that goes into that.
There's definitely a lot of like fire that gets lit, right? Like my friend and I doing the few acres of snow, or there's a game player who comes who's a really good game player, and he came and played a bunch of Euros, and he like absolutely killed it. A couple of years, became like famous or infamous, however you want to look at it, for being a super good game player very quickly. And then he said, you know what, I'm going to go learn some war games, and I'm going to go mess with that side of the convention, and just like completely picked up new games every year that he was like, I'm gonna become really amazing at this, and then practiced it. And like this year he ended up like winning in a tournament that he had practiced for. He's like extremely hype about that. He could have, if he's there just to win, he could have just kept playing the games he's already good at, but he was like, no, I'm gonna pick up this new thing. And so that like fire getting lit under you is definitely a like cool motivating factor.
Yeah, the challenge of it. I mean, we joke a lot about how often Nick wins, and that's because he wins a lot. But it's also like, I love that, Nick. Like, I love that challenge of every time I sit down to a game, I'm like, can I beat Nick at this one? Like, and then that's also one of the things that I was, kind of noticing about you talking about this convention is that like, it seems like a lot of like-minded players. Like I imagined, like, as you were talking, describing some of these finals, I was like, oh, Nick is playing some other Nicks. Like, interesting. Like, how's that gonna like I kind of want to be like a bird, bird's eye view on that. Like, I'm like,
Totally. And there's definitely players like me, but I do also want to stress that I think the both of you would very easily and comfortably slot into this convention. Anastasia, especially, I think that this is like right up your alley in terms of like the vibe, like what it's going for. I'm super intense at this convention. I treat it really seriously. Like I jam pack my schedule full of things. We haven't even talked about like the like meta game of the convention, which is that every game that you do well in scores you points based on how well you score, how many and how many hours it takes to play the game, and maybe how many players that play the game too. So there's this like meta scoring thing that at the end they say like, this person did the best this year. And so I go hard on that because that's what makes me excited. But there's like 24 of us who care about that.
A meta game for Nick to win.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Almost everybody else that's there is there to like play the games that they love and like hang out. And
I'm not intimidated by hanging out with a bunch of Nicks. I'm excited about it. Every win is that much sweeter. I'm just saying.
One thing that kind of occurred to me while Nick was talking is that I legitimately, before this conversation, did not know that you've been going to this thing for 2 decades. Just since you were 12, I mean, that makes this incredibly formative for you, I suppose. Like as a gamer, like
100%.
I guess I could almost extrapolate and say like, you are a WBC gamer, and I like playing games with you. And like, if there's kind of a correlation there, and the inverse, that like I like playing games with you. So, if this is the thing that sort of molded you to a certain extent, I probably won't win very much based off of my track record with you, but I'll probably also have fun because, that's why we're friends.
That's kind of what I was implying a little bit totally, John.
Yeah. I mean, to the point about it being formative, I have, and I'm not exaggerating, 20 plus friends that I talk to outside of the convention that are still my friends. I have double that in acquaintances, folks that I will occasionally bump into, do other things with, or just like play board games online. Like y'all mentioned some of those players already in this conversation. And it's really the like social component of this convention is something that I think is really powerful and exciting. And it's welcoming. Like you definitely see people that come. The convention is super bad at advertising, as evidenced by the fact that the two of you had like never heard about it before and are like in the board game world and like active consumers of board game media. So it's really bad at getting attention. And like, honestly, I think that's not necessarily what they're going for. Like they want to run what they run. They want to like have the convention like their way. And I think they're happy with that. And I'm happy with that. But I'd love for more people to come. I think that would be super exciting.
Well, before we we wrap this up, Nick, I think that, the suspense, you need to tell us. You need to tell us, what are you the reigning world champion of this year?
Yeah, this year, there are games that I would not have expected to win. I got seconds in games that I'm really good at, and I won a Delph Afflicted, Titan the Arena, and oh god, I'm blanking on the third one.
Wasn't it Five Tribes?
Five Tribes.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Five Tribes is the other one. Yeah, that's great.
All right, what are the games you got second in? What were the almost there?
Automobile, Great Western Trail, and something else that I'm normally pretty good at.
Scythe. No,
Scythe.
not Scythe.
No,
it was
it's
Scythe.
You got it. You
Yeah,
guys know more
yeah.
about this than I do.
We paid attention.
I know.
Well,
you
and
were
it
so high
helps.
following. It was really exciting, honestly.
It helps because you did like a summary and after thing, right?
Yeah. So I as you said, I kind of like live blogged it for our Discord channel, which was a lot of fun and like honestly very motivating for me. And if you want to like hear more details about the games themselves, a little bit about my emotional state, which got rocky in the middle of the week, you can actually go check out my BGG geek list about it. I think it's literally called like Nick Goes to WBC or something like that. Super easy to search up.
We'll put a link to it in the description of this episode.
Even better.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can check out the dirty details there if you like.
It's I don't mean this negatively. It's exhaustively detailed. It's actually a really awesome geek list. It's like
it's
essentially
a blow
being,
by blow. It's really fun.
It is being inside Nick's mind for 9 days as he goes slightly crazy and kicks a bunch of butts.
It also is kind of like a little bit. We've talked about this before, but like when we play a game, I know I already mentioned Hallertau, but like what was it? Oh, like Anno 1800, like last
Yeah.
year. Sometimes like it sort of is like emblematic of like how to like we'll do like session reports of games sometimes and just be like, we just did it with a game. What did we just play? Where
Dead Reckoning we did it a couple times.
Oh, Dead Reckoning. What am I
Yeah.
talking about? Yeah, where like every time we played, it, like, oh, and then this happened and then this crazy thing. So I was having some. I was loving it as I was reading Nick because I was.
You were a
like,
literal
"That's so fun."
cheerleader in the memes and the animated gifs in the Discord, like
I was invested.
Rooting
I was
from the other side of the country.
I was team Nick. Like, like if I had a T-shirt, I would have worn it. Like I was committed to the, I was the pit crew here. I was in.
Well, maybe someday I'll make it out. It sounds like
I hope
fun.
so.
I mean, there's only so much time to get devoted to board game conventions and whatnot. But honestly, this is the first time I've ever seriously considered it, and you make a compelling case. I'll definitely say that.
It's a great use of a week of your life.
I'm definitely gonna think about it. It's next summer. Is it? It's always in August.
Yeah, it's almost always at the end of July, like usually the last week of July. It's almost always exactly 1 week before Gen Con, which when I was younger and braver, I would like go from WBC to Gen Con. There doesn't tend to be a ton of overlap between those two conventions because their vibes are so different, but that's about the time that it is.
And where is it? And like, we
Yeah,
don't need to go into
so-
the nitty gritty, but like, do you
Yeah, no,
stay
great
on
question.
site with like hotel rooms and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the current site is at Seven Springs Ski Resort. So it's a ski resort that they use in the summer, and it is about half an hour to 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh. So usually people, drive in or fly into Pittsburgh, and then I think they have a shuttle that runs people there. I drove, so I haven't done that myself. And then most people stay on site, but because it's a ski resort, there's also kind of like condominiums in the area that I
makes
know
sense.
a handful of people will kind of like rent a condo and then like stay there, with a couple people usually, and then sort of like, take the 5 or 10 minute transport into the convention site.
I'm plotting. We'll see where the world is and all of that in a
Yeah,
year.
exactly.
Well, thanks so much for letting us pick your brains on this one, Nick. This is a lot of fun. We already knew a decent amount just from your the back and forth, but I honestly learned a bunch just in this little conversation too.
Yeah, I could talk about this convention for days, and I couldn't get tired of it. It's so great. If you're listening and you're curious, like definitely check it out. It's well worth your time. Don't judge the website too harshly. It's horrible. The convention is much better than the website. Don't mind it.
Also, if anyone listening to this has questions for Nick about the convention or just about conventions in general, then please leave those on the video version of this episode. If you're listening in podcast form, there's a link to it in the description. We love to get comments. We'll definitely keep the conversation going about a lot of these. As Nick said, he could talk about this forever, so certainly bend his ear.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.